Sylvia Likens. The tragedy of Sylvia Likens is a haunting study in group malice and the failure of community oversight. In 1965, carnival workers Lester and Betty Likens left their daughters, Sylvia and Jenny, in the care of Gertrude Banaszewski for $20 a week. Gertrude, a mother of 7 struggling with poverty and health issues, soon turned the girls' boarding arrangement into a house of horrors. Initially, the abuse was sparked by late payments, but it rapidly devolved into targeted sadism. Gertrude encouraged her own children and neighborhood youths to participate in Sylvia's torment. The group dynamic allowed individual guilt to evaporate as dozens of local children witnessed or participated in the abuse. Sylvia was kept in a basement, starved, and subjected to physical trauma until she succumbed on October 26, 1965. Her sister Jenny, who suffered from polio and was also threatened, eventually provided the testimony that secured Gertrude's life sentence. These stories are difficult to hear, but they remind us of the importance of vigilance. If you find these investigative breakdowns valuable, hit the like button to help more people hear Sylvia's story. James Bulger. One of the most chilling incidents in British history occurred on February 12, 1993, when 2-year-old James Bulger was abducted from a shopping center in Bootle. The world was horrified to discover that the kidnappers were not seasoned predators, but 2 10-year-old boys, Robert Thompson and John Venables. Security footage of the boys leading James away remains some of the most haunting imagery in criminal records. Over the course of a 2-mile walk, nearly 38 people saw the trio, yet no one intervened, assuming they were brothers. James was taken to a railway embankment where he was fatally assaulted. The discovery of his body sparked a national outcry and an intense debate over the age of criminal responsibility. Thompson and Venables were convicted and given new identities upon their release at age 18. While Thompson has remained out of the public eye, Venables has been repeatedly returned to prison for possessing illicit material, most recently being denied parole in 2024. Fan Man Yi. In 1999, the Hello Kitty murder shocked Hong Kong with its grotesque nature. The victim, 23-year-old Fan Man Yi, was abducted over a minor debt of 4,000 Hong Kong dollars. For an entire month, she was held captive by Chan Man Lok and 2 accomplices in a Granville Road apartment. A 13-year-old girl, the girlfriend of one of the men, witnessed the daily torture and was forced to participate in Fan's care. Fan's ordeal ended in mid-April, but the horror didn't stop there. To dispose of the evidence, the perpetrators dismembered her body and hid her skull inside a large Hello Kitty mermaid doll. The crime only came to light when the 13-year-old witness, haunted by nightmares of a ghost, confessed to the police. The ringleader, Chan Man Lok, remains incarcerated as of 2026, while his accomplices have since been released. If you're interested in more international cold cases and solved mysteries, click the bell icon to get notified the second we drop a new video. Sade Robinson. The modern era of dating apps brought a new kind of danger to Milwaukee in April 2024. Sade Robinson, a 19-year-old criminal justice student, met Maxwell Anderson for a first date. Surveillance footage showed the pair enjoying dinner, appearing like any other couple. However, that was the last time Sade was seen alive. When she failed to return home, her family immediately sounded the alarm. Within days, human remains began washing up along the Lake Michigan shoreline, beginning with a severed leg. Digital forensics and dating app records led investigators directly to Anderson. Blood evidence found in his home and GPS data from his vehicle provided a definitive link to the crime. In May 2025, Anderson was convicted and sentenced to life without parole, leaving Sadie's mother to become a vocal advocate for dating app safety and stricter vetting processes. Suzanne Capper. In 1992, Suzanne Capper was the victim of a brutal attack in Greater Manchester that mirrored the plot of a horror film. For a week, the 16-year-old was held captive by John Powell and several others. The group used the theme song from Child's Play to taunt Suzanne, adopting the persona of Chucky while they tortured her. The motive appeared to be a mixture of petty jealousy and unsubstantiated claims of theft. Eventually, Suzanne was taken to a remote area, doused in petrol, and set on fire. In an incredible display of resilience, she managed to survive long enough to reach a roadway and flag down help. Before passing away from her 80% burns, she provided a dying declaration that named every one of her attackers. Her testimony ensured that Jean Powell and Bernadette McNeely were sentenced to life in prison. Every victim deserves to have their story told with dignity. Subscribe now to help us keep these memories alive and advocate for justice. Shonda Scherer. The 1992 murder of Shonda Scherer in Indiana highlighted the lethal potential of adolescent jealousy. Shonda, only 12 years old, was abducted from a sleepover by 4 teenage girls: Melinda Loveless, Lori Tackett, Hope Rippey, and Toni Lawrence. Melinda, the ringleader, believed Shonda was a rival for the affections of another girl. The group drove Shonda to a remote field where they subjected her to hours of physical abuse before setting her on fire while she was still alive. The brutality of the crime, committed by girls as young as 15, stunned the nation. All 4 were tried as adults and received significant prison terms. As of 2019, all participants have been released, sparking ongoing debates about the rehabilitation of juvenile offenders who commit extreme acts of violence. Tim McLean. On July 30th, 2008, one of Canada's most shocking public tragedies occurred on a Greyhound bus. Tim McLean, a 22-year-old carnival worker, was sleeping with his headphones on when he was suddenly attacked by a fellow passenger, Vince Lee. Without any provocation, Lee, who was suffering from untreated schizophrenia, fatally stabbed Tim and proceeded to commit acts of cannibalism in front of horrified passengers. The bus was evacuated, and a lengthy standoff with the RCMP ensued. Lee was eventually found not criminally responsible due to his mental state, as he believed he was hearing the voice of God. After years of intensive psychiatric treatment and monitoring, he was granted an absolute discharge in 2017, and now lives under a new name. Tim's mother has since become a tireless advocate for victims' rights, questioning a system that allows such a quick return to society after a heinous act. Richard Kelvin. Adelaide, Australia, was paralyzed with fear between 1979 and 1983 due to a series of disappearances known as the family murders. The final victim was 15-year-old Richard Kelvin, the son of a prominent news presenter. Richard was abducted just a short distance from his home and held captive for 5 weeks before his body was found in the Adelaide Hills. The investigation led to Bevan Spencer von Einem, an accountant who appeared respectable on the surface. While von Einem was the only one convicted, investigators long suspected he was part of a high society network of predators. Despite decades of speculation, von Einem took his secrets to the grave, dying in prison in September 2024. The case fundamentally changed the way Adelaide viewed its own safety, exposing a dark underbelly in a supposedly quiet city. We are halfway through today's cases. If you're a fan of deep dive true crime, drop a comment below letting us know which case has impacted you the most. Stephanie Isaacson. The 1989 murder of Stephanie Isaacson in Las Vegas remained a cold case for 32 years until a record-breaking forensic breakthrough. Stephanie was abducted while walking to high school, and her body was found in a nearby desert area. With no witnesses and minimal evidence, the trail went cold almost immediately. In 2021, advanced DNA sequencing was performed on a sample consisting of only 0.12 nanograms, roughly 15 human cells. This remains the smallest DNA sample ever used to solve a crime. The profile pointed to Darren Roy Marchand, a man who had been a suspect in another 1986 murder. Although Marchand had committed suicide in 1995, the technology provided Stephanie's family with the answers they had sought for decades, proving that no sample is too small for modern science. Sarah Yarborough. In December 1991, honor student Sarah Yarborough was murdered on the grounds of Federal Way High School in Washington. She had arrived early for drill team practice, but her body was found in the bushes shortly after. Despite a DNA profile being recovered, the killer remained a ghost for 28 years. The breakthrough arrived in 2019 through forensic genetic genealogy. Investigators built a massive family tree that eventually narrowed the search down to Patrick Leon Nicholas. Surveillance teams followed Nicholas and recovered a discarded napkin and cigarette butt, which provided a 1 in 120 quadrillion match to the crime scene. Nicholas, who had a history of violence dating back to 1983, was finally sentenced to 45 years in prison in 2023. Crystal Bislanovich. The 1995 murder of Crystal Bislanovich in Utah was solved thanks to a revolutionary forensic vacuum. Crystal's body was found on the banks of the Provo River, and though rocks at the scene were believed to be the murder weapon, traditional swabbing failed to recover usable DNA. 18 years later, investigators utilized MVAC technology, which pulls DNA from the microscopic crevices of porous surfaces. This extracted a full profile that matched Joseph Michael Simpson, a man with a prior murder conviction. Simpson was living in Florida when he was arrested in 2013. In 2016, he was sentenced to life without parole, marking a major victory for the application of new technology to old evidence. If you want to support the channel and see more content like this, consider hitting the join button to become a member for exclusive perks. Arliss Perry. The 1974 murder of Arliss Perry inside Stanford Memorial Church was a mystery that haunted the university for 44 years. Arliss, a 19-year-old newlywed, was found in a ritualistic scene after going to the church to pray. For decades, theories ranged from occult groups to serial killers like the Son of Sam. In 2018, DNA found on Arliss's clothing was matched to Stephen Blake Crawford, the security guard who discovered the body in 1974. Crawford had been a person of interest for years, but always maintained his innocence. When police arrived at his door to arrest him in 2018, Crawford took his own life, leaving many questions about his motives unanswered, but finally closing the book on one of California's most famous cold cases, Sophie Sergei. In 1993, Sophie Sergei was found murdered in a dormitory bathtub at the University of Alaska Fairbanks. She was visiting friends when she was cornered in a restroom by an opportunistic predator. For 26 years, the case sat cold, with no suspects appearing in any database. Genetic genealogy finally broke the case in 2019, leading police to Stephen Downs, a nurse living in Maine who had been a student at the university in 1993. Downs lived in the same dorm where the body was found. Despite his denials, the DNA evidence was irrefutable. In 2022, Downs was convicted and sentenced to 75 years in prison, ending nearly 3 decades of agony for Sophie's family in their small Alaskan village. Linda Slatton. The 1981 murder of Linda Slatton in Lakeland, Florida, contains one of the most disturbing betrayals in criminal history. Linda was killed in her home while her sons were present. For 38 years, the killer remained unknown until genetic genealogy identified Joseph Clinton Mills in 2019. The horror deepened when the family realized who Mills was. In the years following the murder, Mills had been the youth football coach for Linda's son. He had acted as a mentor and trusted figure to the very boy whose mother he had killed. This chilling level of manipulation ended in 2022 when Mills was sentenced to life without parole, finally exposing the predator who had hidden in plain sight for nearly 4 decades. We're nearing the final stories of the night. If you've made it this far, you're a true crime fanatic. Don't forget to check out our playlist for more unsolved mysteries. Janelle Cruz. Janelle Cruz was the final victim of the Golden State Killer, Joseph James DeAngelo. In 1986, the 18-year-old was murdered while house-sitting for her family in Irvine, California. Because DeAngelo operated across so many jurisdictions, it took decades for investigators to realize the same man was responsible for dozens of rapes and murders across the state. The 2018 arrest of DeAngelo through the first major use of forensic genetic genealogy changed the landscape of law enforcement forever. DeAngelo, a former police officer, had used his training to evade capture for 32 years. In 2020, he pleaded guilty to a staggering number of crimes to avoid the death penalty, receiving multiple life sentences. Annette Schnee and Bobby Joe Oberholzer. On a freezing January night in 1982, 2 women disappeared separately while hitchhiking near Breckenridge, Colorado. Annette Schnee and Bobby Joe Oberholzer were both found murdered in the snow. For 40 years, the case was famous for a bizarre twist. On the night of the murders, a man had been rescued from a snowdrift near the crime scene by local authorities. In 2021, genetic genealogy identified that stranded motorist as Alan Lee Phillips. The very people who rescued him had unknowingly helped a killer flee the scene. Phillips was convicted in 2022 and received 2 life sentences. However, in early 2023, he took his own life in prison, leaving the families with a bittersweet sense of resolution. Danielle Houchins. The 1996 disappearance of Danielle Houchins in Montana remained a local mystery for 28 years. Danielle vanished while in the Huntley area, and her body was discovered in a field days later. In 2024, cold case investigators utilized advanced hair DNA analysis to identify Paul Hutchinson as the primary suspect. Hutchinson had been a student in the area at the time and had lived a seemingly normal life in the decades since. When investigators confronted him with the DNA evidence during an interview, Hutchinson realized his time was up. Shortly after the meeting, he committed suicide before he could be formally charged. While the DNA provided the who, his death ensured that the why remained a mystery. If you want to help us keep investigating these cases, consider sharing this video. Information is our best tool for justice. Marilyn Decker. In 1987, Marilyn Decker was murdered in her Davie, Florida apartment. The trail went cold until 2025, when DNA was successfully extracted from hair shafts preserved for nearly 40 years. The profile matched Donald Lawless, a man with a long history of violent crime. Lawless had died in 1995, just 8 years after the murder, meaning he lived and died without ever facing the consequences of his actions. Despite this, the identification allowed the case to be officially closed as exceptionally cleared. Catherine Davio. The 2008 murder of Catherine Davio in Montreal was a 17-year mystery that spanned international borders. Catherine was killed in her own home, and despite a DNA profile being recovered, no matches were found in Canadian databases. In 2025, genetic genealogy pointed to Jacques Bolduc, a career criminal. Bolduc had died in 2021, 4 years before the technology caught up to him. The discovery brought closure to Catherine's family, though the perpetrator had managed to evade earthly justice. Christine Gallegos. In 1985, Christine Gallegos was murdered after hitchhiking to work near Salt Lake City. For 40 years, the case remained one of the city's most frustrating cold cases. In 2025, NA evidence and genealogy techniques identified Ricky Lee Stallworth, a former Air Force airman, as the killer. Like many others on this list, Stallworth had died of natural causes in 2023, just 2 years before he would have been arrested. His identification solved the 40-year-old riddle, proving once again that time eventually runs out for every secret.